Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to CPM special section on e-commerce. And every year, CPM organizes a special topic. It's very much relevant to the recent development. This year, CPM special session on e-commerce decided by Bureau last year in Beijing. Why we have the topic? Because this year is the IPPC annual theme is plant health and trade facilitation. I'm sure this is a milestone, this activity or events for CPM or for IPPC. And after that decision, and in CPM secretarial, we organized that one is mainly by implementation teams, and mainly by Sarah, I can say, make a lot of efforts for it. The major objective for this special session, I think three. First one, disseminating the IPPC annual themes on plant health and the trade facilitation. Second one, to get to know some experience on e-commerce in relation to phytosanitary risk. And the third one, of course, is promote development of e-commerce by raising awareness, by strengthening international cooperation, and particularly by facilitate the implementation of CPM number 9 recommendations. So, to doing that, I think for us, this session, we have a variety of speakers from a national and also international organization. International organization from WTO, WCO, CBD. Now it's the first time for IPPC have contact, for communicate with the carrier, like DHL, FedEx, UPS, and the major e-trader, eBay. They will be here to be with us. Also, for the first time, for IPPC to approaching the carrier and e-traders. And also, it's the first time, and abroad of you will be present here in our community. So what I'm going to say, and welcome all of you for this special session, and I hope we enjoy that. Everybody, please participate and encourage you have very good this special session. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Shah. And in view of the importance of this topic and in view of the time, I'm usually would give a great big spiel, but you're lucking out today, so I'm just going to let Sarah Brunel from the Capacity Development Implementation Staff proceed. Thank you.
Bon après-midi, mesdames et messieurs. Je vais vous introduire la session de cet après-midi. Je vais pour commencer vous donner des éléments de contexte sur le commerce international concernant les végétaux et les produits végétaux. Vous avez dû vraisemblablement lire les documents qui ont été préparés dans le but de vous fournir le plus d'informations sur ce sujet et apprendre que le volume qui est vendu sur Internet de végétaux et de produits végétaux est en constante augmentation et que le plus souvent, ces produits sont vendus sans que la législation phytosanitaire soit respectée, puisqu'on ne sait pas forcément où est le vendeur, où est l'acheteur, et les législations phytosanitaires qui sont confinées à une région ne sont ni connues ni respectées. Et également, les analyses de risque ne sont pas entreprises pour ces produits. De plus, les organisations nationales de protection des végétaux sont souvent peu au courant de ces marchés et n'effectuent pas d'analyse de risque. La CIPV s'est donc intéressée à ce sujet dès 2010 et c'est la 22e consultation technique des organisations régionales de protection des végétaux qui a soulevé le sujet, suite à quoi le système de revue et de soutien à la mise en œuvre, autrement dit l'IRSS en anglais, a conduit une étude pour faire le point sur le sujet, analyser quels sont les produits qui posent problème et cette étude, qui est disponible sur le site phytosanitary.info, donne quelques recommandations. Cette étude a été présentée lors de la CPM 7 en 2012. Les pays l'ont discutée pour aboutir en 2014 à la recommandation sur le commerce électronique. Pour donner un point de détail, cette recommandation traite des végétaux, des produits végétaux, des végétaux destinés à la plantation, du sol et d'organismes vivants couvrant une vaste gamme taxonomique qui eux-mêmes font l'objet de commerce ou d'échanges par des collectionneurs. Et ceci, la Convention sur la diversité biologique nous en parlera bien, puisque les espèces envahissantes, qui sont souvent vendues de par le commerce électronique, constituent un gros problème. Cette recommandation a donc été adoptée par la CMP en 2014, et l'an dernier, en juin, le Bureau a décidé de remettre ce sujet sur la table et l'a considéré comme une priorité, devant faire l'objet de cette session spéciale aujourd'hui. Nous sommes donc ici réunis pour vous sensibiliser aux risques phytosanitaires qui sont associés avec le commerce électronique. Nous voulons vraiment ne pas seulement vous sensibiliser et vous donner de l'information sur ce sujet, mais vraiment faire un état des lieux et réfléchir ensemble à comment nous allons pouvoir faciliter la mise en œuvre de la recommandation 9 de la CMP. Donc, nous allons partager des expériences avec vous, avec un panel vaste, de façon à toucher aux différents points qui sont présents dans cette recommandation. Et ces points, en substance, sont listés dans cette diapositive. Donc, le premier point est de développer des mécanismes pour collaborer avec les commerçants électroniques pour réduire les risques phytosanitaires. Nous souhaiterions également promouvoir la conformité aux législations phytosanitaires des clients et des vendeurs qui opèrent au travers du commerce électronique. Nous souhaitons renforcer la coordination avec les services de courrier express. Et nous souhaiterions également investiguer plus avant sur les risques phytosanitaires qui sont posés par toute forme de commerce à distance. Nous avons réuni un panel, j'ai envie de dire, vraiment exceptionnel. Nous allons avoir la vision de 3 organisations internationales. Tout d'abord, l'Organisation mondiale du commerce, et c'est Madame Mariam Foll qui nous présentera ses activités. L'Organisation mondiale des douanes est à nouveau parmi nous et est représentée par Madame Michelle Medina. Je tiens à souligner que Madame Medina est venue spécialement pour cette session. Elle est atterrie il y a quelques heures et elle repart ce soir. Et nous aurons également la Convention sur la diversité biologique qui nous fera part de ses activités. Une première pour nous au sein de la CIPV, et M. Chat l'a souligné, c'est la présence du secteur privé. Et nous avons le privilège d'avoir avec nous, au cours de cette session, en ligne, M. Carlos Grotaner, qui est le directeur général de Global Express, qui nous présentera la vision des plus gros transporteurs, à savoir DHL Express, FedEx, TNT et EPS. Carlos, est-ce que tu es parmi nous? Il faudra qu'on teste ça plus tard. Nous avons également le privilège d'avoir, lors de cette session, l'intervention de Mike Carson de eBay, qui nous présentera ses activités, les activités d'eBay sur le sujet. Pour préparer cette session, nous avons contacté les plus gros commerçants en ligne, à savoir Amazon, qui n'a pas donné suite à notre demande. Nous avons également contacté Alibaba, qui est assez actif sur la mise en œuvre de réglementation. Alibaba est très intéressé pour avoir des informations sur ce qui se passe dans cette session et pour collaborer pour la suite des activités. Et enfin, nous avons eu le vif enthousiasme d'eBay, qui est le champion sur ce sujet et qui a déjà entrepris des activités pour promouvoir la législation phytosanitaire et qui a même reçu un prix de l'Australie pour ses activités. Et enfin, nous finirons par les activités de 2 organisations nationales de protection des végétaux, qui sont l'Australie avec Kim Ritman et la Corée avec Madame Hong Suk Park. Après ceci, nous vous donnerons 10 minutes pour des questions à l'ensemble des participants, enfin des intervenants, pour nous focaliser vraiment sur des points de travail et des activités à mener par la suite ensemble. Nous avons commencé à assembler un document de travail, nous avons rassemblé toutes les propositions des gens qui sont ici réunis et qui nous ont fourni leurs présentations. Et nous avons articulé ces axes de réflexion autour de différents points. Tout d'abord, favoriser, renforcer la collaboration entre les organisations internationales. Ensuite, nous avons une piste de travail pour améliorer cette coopération au niveau national. eBay nous a donné des pistes pour identifier et rapporter les risques aux commerçants en ligne. DHL, FedEx, UPS, TNT nous ont donné des pistes pour collaborer avec eux. Et enfin, nous avons quelques idées pour sensibiliser les différents acteurs qui sont concernés par ce sujet. Nous espérons aboutir à des conclusions, des décisions, des idées pour que cette recommandation soit effectivement mise en œuvre dans les pays. Et nous comptons sur votre attention, bien entendu, mais sur votre active participation. Merci par avance.
Thank you, Sarah. Would you be kind enough to introduce our first speaker?
Madame Mariam Fall va maintenant nous introduire les activités de l'Organisation mondiale du commerce. Madame Mariam Fall est membre de l'OMC depuis 1996. Elle est conseillère dans la division de l'agriculture et des produits de base, où elle assiste et conseille aux pays membres de mettre en œuvre leurs engagements au titre de l'accord de l'OMC sur l'application des mesures sanitaires et phytosanitaires. Madame Fall, je vous donne la parole.
Alors, je vais commencer en demandant de l'assistance technique. Est-ce que le micro marche? Oui? Ok, parfait. Hello, good afternoon again to everyone. And actually, I should tell Sarah, as a French speaker, the last name is Fall, not Fall. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I really welcome this opportunity to speak on this very important topic. And as Sarah was saying, I think the lineup is quite extraordinary, and we're very happy to be part of the people who will be speaking on this issue. What I would like to do is to focus on 2 areas of WTO's work, which I think are relevant to this discussion. First is the agreement on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, whose objective is obviously safe trade. And also, I'd like to talk about the WTO work program, declaration and work program on e-commerce, to give you a bit more detail about this discussions we've been having at the WTO. At the outset, I would like to stress that I'm speaking on my own capacity and that I do not try and represent the views and positions of members on this topic. So this is quite important, and as you can see, the footnote at the bottom of the first page of this presentation. So speaking about the SPS agreement, as you're probably aware, the main objective of the SPS agreement is to strike a balance between health and trade. In this case, obviously, we're talking about plant trade. Now, the SPS agreement includes several types of measures which can be taken with the objective of protecting health. And these measures can be anything from product criteria to quarantine and also, of course, inspection, which I thought was quite relevant to our discussion today. The key provisions of the SPS agreement, again, I'm sure are familiar to most of you. The basic, most important provision of the SPS agreement is scientific justification. It's also interesting to see that Article 8, Annex C of the SPS agreement talks about control and inspection and approval procedures. These have to be put in place with the objective of making sure that the food products that come in are actually safe for consumption, also safe in terms of plant and animal health and life. And it is, again, I thought important to note this in the midst of this discussion on phytosanitary risks. Question that have been asked, actually, we asked ourselves in the team when we got this invitation is there a link? What's the link between the SPS agreement and e-commerce? Well, to be perfectly honest, the SPS agreement does not refer in particular to e-commerce. You don't have the wording e-commerce or digital trade that I mentioned in the SPS agreement. The agreement applies to all SPS measures which can affect international trade. Now, in terms of the international standards, obviously, as you know, the IPPC, the OIE, and Codex are referenced in the SPS agreement, and members are strongly encouraged to use international standards that are developed by these organizations. However, members also have the possibility to conduct their own risk assessment. The WTO work on e-commerce is not new. It's actually interesting, again, preparing for this session, to note that the WTO has had a declaration on e-commerce which dates back from 1998. So it's been already on the WTO members' radar for quite a while. And it's a declaration which then was followed by a work program on e-commerce, which provides for quite a comprehensive discussion of all trade-related aspects of e-commerce. And that decision also, which was in 1998, provided for a provisional moratorium on custom duties on electronic transmissions. When we talk about the work program on e-commerce, what do members talk about? So this decision, which was adopted in 1998, defines e-commerce as the following. It is understood to mean the production, distribution, marketing, sale, or delivery of goods and services by electronic means. Now, that being said, all trade of goods, either through physical or electronic means, should be subject to WTO obligations and provisions. E-commerce is discussed throughout the WTO. There are some very specific bodies which have more detailed discussions of e-commerce. The Council for Trade and Goods, I'll get back to that in a second. Services, of course, are discussed under the CTS. TRIPS Council reviews e-commerce related to intellectual property. But I also wanted to point out the work of the General Council, which keeps under constant review the work on e-commerce and the work program on e-commerce and its implementation, and also the decision by the Ministerial Conference, which is the highest decision body decision-making body in the WTO. Specifically on goods, the discussions on the implementation of this work program have been ongoing in the CTG, which is the Council for Trade in Goods in the WTO. Interestingly, it is the body which also oversees the work of the SPS committee and the TBT committee, the Committee on Agriculture and others. And in that discussion, some issues have been raised by members, and they're listed here on your slide. In particular, I highlighted the one on standard-related issues, which was put on the table by members as an issue which needed to be kept in mind in terms of the discussion on e-commerce. And I think it makes an interesting link to the discussions we've been having or will be having under this topic. We have seen since the ministerial meeting which took place in Nairobi in December 2015, a real surge of interest, a renewed interest, I would say, from the membership in terms of discussion on e-commerce. So again, I think the timing is quite interesting and quite right for this IPPC special topic session on the phytosanitary risks that arise within e-commerce. Our members themselves have been looking at this issue, and we've had more than 11 submissions from members on the issue of e-commerce. Now, they cover all types of issues and areas of interest, but I wanted to, again, highlight two issues here. And this is, again, issues that were put on the table for discussion by our members. The first one is regulatory cooperation. This is in terms of exchanges of best practices and solutions between organizations, WTO members and other international organizations. And again, here IPPC FAO would be very, I think, interested in being able to add their voice to this discussion. And the other one is cooperation with international organizations, again, to avoid duplication of work and efforts and make sure that elements that are relevant to the discussion are also kept in mind by WTO members when they put in place this work program and discuss any issues related to it. There are also areas of relevant work at the WTO. Trade facilitation, obviously, we've mentioned this a few days ago and throughout this session. Aid for Trade, as I said, there's going to be the global review for Aid for Trade, which is taking place in July, and they have a questionnaire which will include e-commerce related questions, more on the processes and the technology linked to e-commerce. And then, of course, SCDF and the work they've been doing on e-certification, which I've also addressed and which has been addressed earlier. So without any further ado, let me skip to my last slide, which is on possible cooperation between our secretariats. Again, this is from the point of view of a member of the WTO secretariat, not a WTO member. In terms of possible issues for further consideration, there is first of all to raise awareness of the SPS committee members on the work of IPPC and the recommendations that IPPC has adopted on the issue of phytosanitary risk in e-commerce. As I said, there's going to be, it looks like, renewed interest by our members to discuss e-commerce, and it will be very interesting to follow those exchanges and see where possibly there's an identification of gaps in trade rules regarding e-commerce on plants and plant products, which could be a stepping stone for IPPC and others who are working in the area to come in and join the discussion. IPPC should, I believe, link up and also consult with the other two sisters that are referenced in the SPS agreement, namely OIE and Codex, to see if they've been looking into possible risk identified also in e-commerce in their areas of work, and if there is a possibility or a need to develop any necessary recommendations. We have heard about the recommendations adopted by IPPC. It would be interesting again to see how much of those recommendations have been implemented and if there is a need to follow up on those. And then finally, as always, we will pursue the exchanges between Secretariat and make sure to keep each other abreast of anything that's happening in our respective organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Really appreciate that. It was a nice tie-in between what we do. It was a nice definition of the e-commerce and tying that in. Thank you very much, and it's good to see you again. All right. Sarah, please introduce our next speaker.
Nous accueillons maintenant Madame Michèle Medina de l'Organisation mondiale des douanes. Michèle travaille depuis novembre 2012 au sein de l'Organisation mondiale des douanes basée en Belgique. Et plus récemment, elle exerce des fonctions d'agent technique et responsable du programme de la fraude et de la protection du patrimoine culturel au sein de la direction de la facilitation et du contrôle. Merci Michèle.
Thank you, Sarah. I guess everybody can hear me now. First of all, I would like to start by thanking the IPPC for the invitation and for the initiative of actually putting together this panel. Some of you might have heard my Secretary General open this meeting, and the fact that he was here and the fact that I'm here today just demonstrate how committed the WCO is to addressing the challenges associated with e-commerce. I always start by doing one thing. I apologize to the interpreters in advance. When I get riled up with a topic, I tend to speak really fast. I'm going to try and pay attention. But I apologize because I know it's something I tend to not be able to control. I put together quite a comprehensive presentation, understanding full well that we have some time constraints. I'm going to stick to the 10-minute limit, but I also informed the Secretariat that they can share the presentation with you in order to gain more detail of the activities of the WCO in this topic. I'll see if I can make this work. Yes. So the idea with the presentation today is briefly introduce to you what our perspective is in terms of e-commerce and addressing the challenges associated to them. Explain to you a little bit what our newly established working group on e-commerce is doing and where IPPC could potentially contribute in that area of work. What are the potential solutions that we're looking at or exploring in terms of addressing challenges associated to e-commerce? And one of the most critical parts of this work, and it was mentioned by my colleague from the WTO already, how important it is to really engage and work with other stakeholders, whether it be other IGOs or other players in this domain. How many of you have purchased an item online?
Everybody.
That's where it all starts, with the online initiation. Me, I'm an adamant e-commerce shopper. I do it from the convenience of my phone. And in that process, as a consumer, I've encountered a wide array of products that should really not be out there in the market. When we talk at the WCO about e-commerce, we always talk about cross-border e-commerce because this is where customs will have a critical role to play in terms of control or facilitation of those goods. There's going to be physical goods that will end up in the hands of consumers. We try and address e-commerce first from a trade facilitation perspective. We want to see efficient clearance of the goods, efficient clearance and delivery of those goods. But we also want to address safety and security, and I think this is where IPPC is concerned. How do we make sure that those goods or products that are not supposed to be in those supply chains stay out of those supply chains? We also, from a customs perspective, have a revenue collection concern, and it is the increasing splitting of shipments and crossing the border, and customs not having the visibility that it needs to have to ensure that their revenues are protected. And of course, engaging with a wide array of new stakeholders that play in this e-commerce era. What are the challenges? As I mentioned, trade facilitation and security, never easy to balance that dual responsibility that customs administration have. As Sarah mentioned in her opening remarks, we are seeing increasing volumes, and by increasing volumes, I mean it is virtually impossible for customs administrations to be able to control and have a comprehensive overview of what's crossing the borders. But we want speed and efficiency to come with that. One of the issues that we see from a control perspective as well is the lack of accurate and quality data in advance that will allow customs administration to perform targeted controls where necessary. As I mentioned, the challenges associated with fair and efficient revenue collection remains a concern for most of our member administrations. And society protection. When we talk about society protection, it's not just goods that are avoiding or circumventing a regulation crossing the borders. We're talking about e-commerce being used to smuggle weapons, e-commerce being used to smuggle cultural property that has been looted from member jurisdictions. So as other supply chains, e-commerce does present that threat. And we are living in an era of digital revolution. I'm not going to go into detail and bore you with statistics, but as I mentioned, as good as e-commerce is, and we firmly believe that e-commerce is a motor for economic development. As I said, I'm an adamant online shopper myself. There is other sides that come with that globalization, and we need to address those security concerns, and we need to make sure that goods that are being transported via post or via express shipments as a product of an e-commerce transaction do not pose a threat to the safety and security of our nations. When we talk about our work with the postal environment is quite unique when it comes to customs controls. As I said, there's growing volumes. We need expedited clearance for those goods. We need improved efficiency. We need to make sure that we maintain certain levels of supply chain security. And the big challenge that we have is in the post environment as opposed to in the larger importer community. We have a lot of occasional mailers and a lot of occasional users to which customs might not have in advance sufficient information to properly control the supply chains. We are working very closely with the UPU, and I'll talk briefly about our work with other stakeholders in a minute here, but advanced exchange of information is the key for customs administration if we really want to do effective targeting. And we're working quite close with the post and with the express industry to make sure that that information that is necessary is provided to our member states. As I mentioned, we established very recently a working group on e-commerce, specifically to meet at the WTO headquarters in Brussels. We had our first meeting in September last year, and we were quite surprised in terms of the success that this working group had amongst our membership and amongst other international partners. We had over 175 people in the room, which normally is a lot for a small working group. But what was quite unique about it is we had the participation not only of all our member administrations represented in some way or form, but we had the participation of GEA, you'll hear later from Carlos. We had the participation directly of DHL, UPS, FedEx, we had FIATA, we had IATA, we had service payment providers like PayPal, we had Alibaba, Amazon, and eBay. And everybody agreed that we needed to address the challenges together. The main issues that we discussed were what were the business models that were out there in terms of e-commerce transactions, what were the legal and regulatory framework. We talked about facilitation and risk management. We addressed the dark side of e-commerce, as we call it. We talked about exchange of information between e-commerce operators and customs administration. We talked about revenue collection, and we talked about customs and tax cooperation. What is interesting is that the work of the working group did not finish there. They agreed that because the topic of cross-border e-commerce was so wide in its own, that it should be grouped by different themes, and that different stakeholders should take part in what we call those virtual working groups. One of them is related to trade facilitation and simplification. The second one, and which is the one that is relevant to us today, is safety and security. We had another group addressing revenue collection, and we had measurement analysis. There was a face-to-face meeting of those working groups. This work is still ongoing virtually, and I won't stop there because I only have 2 minutes left. What do we talk about when we address potential solutions? We talk about trying to find a new approach to manage risks. And when we talk about a new approach to manage risk, is to actually incorporate those new e-commerce actors into our risk management development process. We have a wide array of new data sources that we can tap into if we do work in a cooperative way with those actors. As I said, advanced data exchange between post and customs, direct data exchange between e-commerce platforms and customs administration, and of course, direct contact with any other relevant authority at the national level that may have concerns as regards to trade over the internet. As I mentioned, we work with a wide array of stakeholders precisely to avoid duplication of efforts. We're working closely with the OECD, particularly as it relates to revenue-related issues. We work very closely with the UPU to be able to jointly address the challenges in the postal environment. UNCTAD, the WTO, is also part of our key partners. We work closely with the World Economic Forum and, as I mentioned, with all of the e-commerce platforms. Concretely here today, what we would recommend, and it sounds very simple, it sounds very basic, but it is what we've heard from our member states, is that we promote together with the IPPC closer cooperation between NPPOs and customs administrations at the national level. You have a customs service that is probably addressing a wide array of issues and a wide array of topics, but they will be your ally in terms of protecting your nation from any threats posed through trade online. We talk about development of potentially a joint risk assessment for more effective targeting. That is, exchanging information between IPPC and the WCO, but also at the national level, to make sure that the targeting criteria that is being applied in the ground by customs officers is effectively addressing your concerns. And of course, increased engagement, and as I said, the fact that I'm here today and my Secretary General was here as well earlier this week, is a proof of this. We want to increasingly engage with IPPC and your member states, and we wish that the occasion is also the other way around. One of the things that we concretely envision is for a representative of IPPC, whether it's directly the Secretariat or whether it's represented through a member state, to join the work of that virtual working group on safety and security that is trying to address risk in this field. With that, I think I probably overstepped my time. I would like to thank you and just thank the organizers again, and we remain at your disposal if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That was a really great presentation that shows the opportunities for both organizations to work more closely. And I think in the past year, Mr. Shah and I and Shane for eFIDO, we've all been engaging with WCO, and I think this is the wave of the future and really appreciate it. And our next speaker will be introduced by Sarah. Thank you.
C'est maintenant Junko Shimura de la Convention sur la diversité biologique qui exerce en tant qu'agent de programme pour les espèces exotiques envahissantes et pour l'initiative de taxonomie mondiale qui va nous présenter les activités de la CBD concernant le commerce électronique. Merci Junko.
Thank you, Sarah. My topic is about the risk of biological invasion posed by e-commerce. You may recall last year at the CPM 11, I have mentioned that those alien species that are even new to science and many group of organisms can be sold in the market, not necessarily by e-commerce, but those species that are not appropriately assessed, their risks are already in the market. This is a study conducted by biological invasion scientists showing that how quickly the number of purchases on e-commerce has grown. And the bottom, the bar graphs at the bottom shows that number of auctions. So auctions participated by anonymous users means that those users may or may not be aware about the risk of biological invasion on those species that they are purchasing. And on the right-hand side is showing the distance of delivery between suppliers and buyers. It is obvious that compared to traditional sale, internet sale shows the longer distance of delivery and also a much wider geographic region being covered in this the delivery process. This gives an additional pressure of spreading of alien species that are not properly assessed its risk of biological invasion. This data was in the case of Solidago species that is commonly called goldenrod. which is already known as invasive species in Europe and eastern part of Asia. This is a separate study. So e-commerce is pretty new. However, how the future holds. Horizon scanning is a new technology to predict the impact of alien species on ecological ecosystems. And they have done different groups of organisms. And from left to the right, the graph shows plants, microinvertebrates, fish, amphibians and reptiles, mammals and birds. Those are commonly sold as a pets or aquarium or terrarium species in the international trade. And the largest number of impacts anticipated by the trade of plants and followed by microinvertebrates, which contains, for example, insects, mites, fungi, and other microscopic organisms. So this graph shows the anticipated types of introduction that may have an impact on ecosystems. The largest number of impact is predicted on pets, aquarium trade, and followed by introduction for ornamental purposes, such as potted plants, seeds, and cut flowers. And then it was followed by botanical garden, zoo, and aquaria, and so on and so forth. The type of impacts in ecological system is mostly anticipated competition between the introduced animals or plants and native species, followed by habitat modification and predation over the native species. And I would like to highlight the meaning of the different colored bars. The blue bars, which shows the highest number of impacts, escape from confined condition, which is not sufficiently considered under the existing international standards. And transport-related pathways either stow away or contaminant will follow the frequent pathways. So taking into these facts, the last COP Conference of the Parties made a decision to address the risk of trade in invasive alien species sold via e-commerce. And COP encouraged parties and other governments to review the risk of biological invasions and associated phytosanitary risks, and to endeavor to develop suitable measures and guidance. Also to promote greater awareness about the risk of biological invasions. It is because the anonymous users may not be aware about the risk of biological invasions. And collaboration with e-commerce traders and managers in developing measures to reduce the risk. I would like to highlight that high frequency of escape from confined condition would be an issue right now, and appropriate measures were listed in the CBD voluntary guidance on pets, aquarium, and terrarium species, and live bait and live food. I have French, Spanish, English version outside of the venue, so if you are interested in, please take one of them. And in the same decision, Secretariat of the CBD was requested by the Conference of the Parties to develop tools and guidance, setting for appropriate national live species import regulation, as well as appropriate border inspection on live species import, and implementation of applicable ISPMs and this CBD voluntary guidance to regulate and manage invasive alien species. Of course, the process should be participatory and effective decision-making must be made. At the national level, I would like to stress that improved collaboration among IPPC and CBD national structure would be important. With this decision, subject to the availability of funding, CBD will convene an expert meeting to address the issue of e-commerce and live species trade in this year. So if those interested parties to IPPC and the other international organizations mentioned in the decisions are very welcome to join this expert meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Junko. I think our first three speakers are definitely highlighting the importance of e-commerce and the fact that a lot of different organizations are really taking note of both the risks and how to deal with them. And we're very fortunate that we've been able to give you this exposure. Now, I think we're going to switch a little bit and get a different perspective. And I would invite Sarah to invite the next speaker to talk.
Merci Craig. Le prochain intervenant est Carlos Grotaner qui va parler depuis Genève. Carlos est connecté. Merci Carlos. Carlos est le directeur général de Global Express Association, association qu'il a rejoint en 2010. Et je tiens à vous préciser que GEA, c'est donc l'acronyme de cette association, représente les 4 plus grands transporteurs en livraison express. Comme je l'ai dit en introduction, cela concerne donc DHL Express, FedEx, TNT et UPS. Carlos, c'est ton tour. Merci.
Bonjour de Genève. Can you hear me well? Hello, can you hear me?
Oui.
Très bien. Good morning from Geneva. Good afternoon, Korea. Thank you very much to the IPPC for involving the private sector in this very important discussion. I know it's a first, but it's a very important first because partnerships are very important in making sure that legitimate trade flows across the world. Thank you for the introduction. I am from the Global Express Association, as Sarah mentioned. In fact, there are 3 members now because TNT has been purchased by FedEx, and you will see a gradual integration of their network into FedEx. Michelle said she spoke fast. Imagine a representative from the express delivery industry. We tend to do everything fast, so apologies in advance to the interpreters if I go too fast. But in the 10 minutes I've been allocated this morning, I will try to cover 3 main things. First, let me introduce the industry with some brief facts about ourselves, explain how our supply chain works, and thirdly, explain both how we help e-traders go international and what possibilities of cooperation this opens with the authorities, what it is that we can do and what it is that we cannot do in this respect. Without further ado, let me introduce the industry. The 3 members of the Global Express Association are, for want of a better term, a conveyor belt. in the global supply chain. We carry things, usually high value added things, including fresh produce, from one doorstep in the world to another doorstep in the world. In fact, this represents over 30 million shipments every day, actually well over 30 million shipments every day. And we're present everywhere in the world. Our members cover 200 countries and territories. To convey this massive volume of individual parcels, we use fleets of aircraft, 1,700 of them, and ground vehicles as well, 170,000 of them, ranging from bikes with a box attached to it to 40-ton lorries. Who uses global express services? Well, in terms of industry sectors, this graph gives you an idea in terms of percentage of our revenue. This is from a report we published in 2015. As you can see, they're all high value added industries, very often B2B, not B2C, but increasingly too B2C. As you can see, retail represents now about 10% of our revenue, but it's a sector that's growing clearly. Our supply chain is a very sophisticated one. I mentioned the material means we use. What we do is pick up a parcel at one doorstep in any city in the world and deliver it at another doorstep in another city in the world in a time-definite way, so that the shipper and the recipient can calculate very clearly, especially for industrial production processes, when a parcel is going to be delivered. And this can be done anything between overnight or up to 72 hours anywhere else in the world after pickup, depending, of course, on the level of service that the customer has purchased from us. It's also a secure shipment and a secure supply chain. We hold administrative or physical control over the shipment from the minute we pick it up to the minute we deliver it. And associated to that, there's also a tremendous investment in information technology. And perhaps the most visible side of that is our capacity to track and trace each and every one of those 30 million daily shipments throughout the progress in our supply chain. That has other uses, as I will mention in a few minutes. So lastly, e-commerce. E-commerce is growing tremendously. We see that. You've probably seen this graph in other presentations around the world. It comes from eMarketer, it's not from us. And to be honest, it covers both services and goods. We are in the goods domain. We as I said, we carry things. The interesting thing for us is that e-commerce has allowed the emergence of micro multinationals. Micro, small and medium-sized enterprises, which usually were, which covered a very narrow geographic area in the past, have now the possibility through the internet of selling their products worldwide. And to reach these markets, very often they come to us and use our networks to make sure that the products reach the customers anywhere in the world in a fast and secure way. So also the proportion of micro, small and medium-sized enterprises that export is growing. But I would like to add a caveat to all this from an express delivery industry perspective. And it's the fact that e-commerce, as far as we are concerned, remains difficult to measure. At the end of the day, what we see is a parcel. We do not see the underlying transaction that has generated this parcel. We don't know whether that is the result of someone ordering online or someone just applying an existing contract in a recurrent way. MISMIS, and I think that's the word you pronounce this new acronym, want to go global, but it is also true that many of the trade rules have been designed for large shipments and large companies that have the wherewithal to know and implement what are pretty complicated rules after all. So for micro, small and medium-sized companies, border practicalities remain a hurdle. And the question is, to what extent can they manage and get to know and implement all the various regulations that affect international trade. Many of them too, especially at the beginning, tend to ship low-value shipments and with low frequency. As they grow, they will send more frequently, more shipments and shipments of a higher value. But that's why we put this, picture here, the container on the one side and the parcel on the other. The rules have been designed for the container rather than for the parcel. Now, of course, this represents tremendous opportunities and huge potential, and we're huge believers in e-commerce. So what we're trying to do is help micro, small, and medium-sized companies go global, because helping them to export is also helping them to comply, and we thrive on legal complying trade. We don't want the other kind of trade in our networks. To do that, there's a number of measures that our members have put in place. First of all, information, detailed information on import and export requirements can be found on our websites, and I will show you instances of that in a minute, so that they know that to ship this particular kind of good from here to there, you need a number of documents, you need to meet a number of procedures. We also advise them in complicated cases that they should either contact one of our representatives or customs agencies directly to help them understand what the formalities might be. And we can also offer customs brokerage services as an option. Some of our members are actually the biggest customs brokers in the world. We also offer web-based tutorials, and there's even import-export shipping software on our website that micro, small, and medium-sized companies can use to document their shipments. This is an example, for instance, from FedEx's Small Business Center. As you can see, there is an advisory there indicating that if you are sending plants, animals, plant products, seeds, you will need to provide a phytosanitary certificate as a condition of entry. Here, the example is from UPS and very specific. It's the guidelines for import and export from Japan to Romania, so it's on a country pair basis. Equally, you have an advisory among other kinds of products that seeds are subject to phytosanitary inspections, and you must provide an original phytosanitary certificate attached to the shipment. DHL, same idea, an advice to contact a commercial representative if you're sending a list of products, among which are perishables, plant products, plants, and seeds. So that's the first step, trying to educate, for want of a better word, newcomers to international trade, that there are rules to be respected and there are documents that need to be attached to the shipment. So, as I said, we thrive in legitimate trade, and we take compliance extremely seriously. We carry shipments in good faith, and we try to partner with customs and with other border agencies so that we are perceived to be a compliant and trustworthy partner. In this respect, there is a number of things we can do. As I said, our networks are very sophisticated. They have sophisticated IT infrastructure behind them. So we can provide for every one of the 30 million shipments that we carry every day, advanced electronic shipment information that enables customs or other agencies to perform risk assessment even before the goods arrive physically at the border. To tell you the truth, very often the question is whether the agencies on the other end can receive and process that information. But in this respect, we think that the arrival of the trade facilitation agreement at the World Trade Organization will provide huge opportunities to operate that infrastructure. We also track and trace the packages, as I mentioned earlier. So if the result of an advanced electronic shipment processing is that a specific shipment is suspicious, we can very quickly identify that individual shipment, remove it from the traffic flow, and present it to the authorities for further inspection. And in some cases, we can do that at our own hubs or our own stations. We have provided the authorities with control facilities in which they can perform their controls safely and efficiently. To the extent that it is legally feasible, we can provide authorities with available relevant information on shippers or consignees that have been identified as trading in offending goods. And where there are repeat offenses, we close the accounts of the shippers and we deny service. But again, all this is subject to some legal requirements. There are limits, after all, to what we can do. We are not the originators of the information. We receive the information from the shipper. And again, we have to believe in good faith that the shipment has been properly documented. It is ultimately the shipper's responsibility to provide accurate and complete information on the shipment. But we can only obtain legally so much information from the customers. As I said, we do not have visibility of the underlying transaction that generated the shipment. We also don't have expertise to identify specific goods. As you saw from the slide about who uses express delivery services, there is a plethora of industries, each with its own expertise. And we don't employ armies of botanists the same way we don't employ armies of chemists to identify false alloys in spare parts, which is also one of the problems we have to deal with. Most importantly, however, is the fact that we're not law enforcement agencies. At the end of the day, it's customs and the other border agencies that determine whether a good is compliant, and it's them who have the right to inspect, and it's also these agencies who have the necessary expertise. So the key word here is cooperation. It's a public-private cooperation that we need to set up, that we need to reinforce, but it has to remain within legal limits. And again, there's so much information we can provide and so much information we can obtain. It has to be sustainable. It has to be economically viable. It has to be operationally non-intrusive. After all, there's a lot of legitimate trade that is moving very fast around the world, and it should not be impeded. To the extent possible, it has to be consistent in a global context, and that's why we welcome the opportunity to talk with you today, because sending different sets of data to different sets of authorities adds cost, adds complexity, both to us and to our customers. And it has to be inclusive of all the stakeholders. So we welcome the opportunity today to discuss these ideas with you, and we look forward to establishing deeper links. Thank you very much.
A lot going on in this world, and I'm very happy to note that the GEA is also a member of the informal eFIDO Industry Advisory Group. So closing a circle, we made that contact with the GEA through meetings we've attended at the WCO. So it's a small world, but it's obviously pretty complicated and pretty big. Now on to our next speaker, Sarah, s'il vous plaît.
Notre prochain speaker est Mike Carson de eBay, qui est basé à San Francisco. Est-ce que la connexion est établie? Oui. Bonjour Mike. Mike est le directeur principal de la gestion des politiques et des règlements chez eBay. Il est ainsi responsable de l'élaboration et de la mise en œuvre de politiques pour gérer efficacement les risques réglementaires industriels et liés aux marques chez eBay. Et Mike va nous présenter les initiatives liées aux plantes et aux semences qui ont été entreprises par eBay. Merci Mike. We can't hear you, Mike.
Sorry, I was on mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone, and greetings from San Francisco, and appreciate you offering the opportunity for eBay to come here and present to you today. So I'm going to walk through our eBay's prohibited and restricted items policies with a particular focus on our plants and seeds policy and how we educate our customers about these issues and how we enforce those policies. But before I get into that, I just wanted to do a quick overview of the eBay marketplace, in particular with regards to the size of our marketplace and all of the issues that we have to deal with. And so the two important numbers on this slide are really the number of active users that we have, 167 million buyers on the site, and 1.1 billion listings on eBay worldwide at any one time. So those are the variety of things that we're sifting through, trying to find, in my case or my team's case, things that may be violations of our policies. And for those of you that aren't familiar with how eBay works, we are a marketplace. We never handle any of the goods. We're not a retailer. We simply provide a forum to bring buyers and sellers together from across the world, obviously. And now I'm just going to get into a little bit more on how we enforce our policies, starting with how we educate our customers, the filters and tools that we have, and the different ways we go about enforcing those policies. So obviously when you sign up to use eBay, you have to agree to the user agreement, and within that user agreement is our prohibited and restricted items policies. And so, sorry, just gonna go back a bit there. So we have, a variety of different policies that we cover. Obviously, that there's a number of different regulations throughout, the world that govern different issues. And so we, we cover everything from illegal wildlife trade to recalled items to firearms and weapons to hazardous goods, and obviously to issues with, plants and seeds, both domestically and internationally around the world. And so we, and again, I've noticed a theme throughout the presentations thus far is around educating customers, especially involved in e-commerce. We have a wide variety of users on eBay, everything from large Fortune 500 companies to, small mom and pop sellers to individual sellers like you or me. And obviously there's a different level of knowledge about restrictions on different goods depending upon who's listing these items. And so what we see in the context of people that may be violating eBay's policies are, for the vast majority of those people, it's simply they are just not aware of what the restrictions are. And as soon as they're made aware of them, they're more than happy to comply. And because they don't want to jeopardize, their other businesses or, run afoul of the policies and maybe get suspended from the site or something like that. And so they're overcoming that that education gap is something that we try and do in a variety of manners. And so one is through our policy pages. And so here's an example of our plants and seeds policy for Australia. And we worked very closely with the Department of Agriculture to originally develop this policy, and have worked with them over the years to update it as their, either websites have changed or other issues have changed with them. We try and obviously these are based on what the regulations are, either the import regulations or the domestic sale regulations, but we try and condense it down into sort of an easy to read version of the regulations for our users. So they get a kind of a summary and a top level summary of what to be aware of. And then we provide links to those government websites where they can learn more information. If they have questions, go to the right people within those, within those organizations in order to, ask that information. Sorry, the slides keep moving around on me a little bit. Here's another example of our plants and seeds policy for the U.S. site as well. Again, working with the USDA in the U.S. on this information, similar to what we did with Australia. Again, trying to provide a high-level summary with links to the government websites where where buyers and sellers can learn more information and ask questions as well. So now we get in a little bit more into how we enforce our policy. And we use a system that we call internally ELVIS, which stands for eBay's Listing Violation Identification System. And basically there's 4 main things that this filtering system can do. And it's largely based on keywords related to, that are found in eBay listings. And so one thing it can do is it can flag an item for review. It can identify a keyword that may be in a listing and queue it up for an agent to review it, a customer service agent to review it and determine whether or not it violates our policies. It can block an item if the keyword is specific enough and unique enough that we know that we're not going to be catching false positives. It can block the item and not allow it to be listed at all, and then a message is shown to the seller as to what the issue is. It can hide visibility of items as well on international sites. So if something is listed on the US site and we don't want it to show up, say, on the Australia site because that seed is prohibited for import in Australia, we can hide the visibility of that item on the Australia site. And lastly, it can message sellers as well during the listing flow. Like I said, if the item is being blocked, it will tell the seller why it's being blocked and what the policy is. It can also passively just message sellers as they're creating the listing, more as like an FYI, that there may not be a specific issue with their listing, but because they're listing in a certain category or it contains certain keywords, we want to make them aware of what the policy is. So how do we get the information for these filters? We get it from a variety of sources, and you know, we're open, like Carlos was mentioning previously. Like the shipping companies aren't experts in these different areas. We're not experts in these areas either. We have a lot of tools at our disposal that we can use, but we need the information from the different experts to help us implement those tools. And so we get information from a variety of people, whether it's eBay members ourselves, other groups internally within eBay that may discover things, but also, more importantly, the real experts in these areas, whether it be a regulatory agency, a law enforcement agency, or even industry that's expert in these areas. And it's a constant process of updating these filters, inputting that information, and seeing if there's new trends and new things that are developing that we need to update our filters with. So there's obviously, like going back to the original slide that I showed with 1 billion listings, obviously there's a lot of challenges that come from trying to filter those on a real-time basis. One is there's a certain percentage of sellers that do know that they're violating our policy and may try and circumvent it. They may try and change a keyword. They may try and list it in another category and sort of test us and try and get around our filters. And so we're always on the lookout for that, and needing to adjust and account for those those behaviors. But the more challenging part is just, like I said, the sheer volume and false positives that may come up. So if a keyword is very common, we can't be flooding our queues with thousands and thousands of results for things that are completely irrelevant, because we want to make sure that we're concentrating on the things that are most likely to violate our policy. So there's always a balance that we're trying to strike of making sure we're looking for the right the right items, and then we're not being too narrow, but at the same time making sure that we're not like I said, flooding our our internal queues with information that's just not relevant, and then that way, because of that, then the customer service teams and the filters folks can't actually get to the things that we really want to investigate, because they're wading through a bunch of listings that have nothing to do with what we're looking for. So that's a a constant battle that we're facing. So as I mentioned before, there's the seller education is a is a piece that we try and do and try and address with folks as often as possible. So it started with the policy pages, where we have a lot of information on there, but I also mentioned that we can, through the Elvis system, message sellers as they're going through the listing process. And so here's an example of it. It's probably pretty small on your screen there, but this is actually an example from our Australia site. If you create a listing in our plants and seeds category, this is a message that's displayed that just reminds sellers that there's restrictions around it, and it provides a link to our plants and seeds policy. And also, in that case, from there you can access the Department of Agriculture website and get more information. But just calling to mind to sellers that there may be restrictions around what they're listing, and they should be aware of it. And so this is very timely information that's actually displayed to them when they're just about to create a listing for a certain product. So it's it can be very helpful to, again, educating the sellers, and in the ideal situation, avoiding a prohibited listing being posted in the first place. And then I also mentioned we do also have block filters where a message is displayed. And so here's an example of if a non-Australia seller tried to create a listing for capsicum seeds on the Australia site, they would be blocked from creating that listing because there's import restrictions on those. And this is obviously information that we got from the Department of Agriculture, and with a variety of different keywords we got from them, and they helped us develop these systems and develop this information so that we could input it into our system and get these results. And then the visibility block that I talked about as well. On the left-hand side, you can see the number of results for these seeds on the US site. And then on the right-hand side is on the Australia site. It's a vastly smaller number. If we hadn't had those visibility blocks in place, that number would probably be about the same on both sites, because our default within eBay is to display items on as many sites as possible globally, because we're, from a business standpoint, we want people around the world to be able to view listings from anybody, from anywhere. But we can put these blocks in place that will restrict the visibility of these items, so that only listings that are coming from Australia sellers would be visible on the Australia site, while the nearly 1,000 listings on the US site that are coming from US sellers are not being made visible on the Australia site. And then the final step is, obviously we go through a lot of education pieces and trying to block things before they get on the site. But obviously, again, with 1 billion listings and all of these different policies that we're trying to enforce, it's never a perfect environment. Things will get by, and then what do? How do we deal with them? So if we find items on the site that are in violation of our policy, the first step is obviously we always remove the listing, and we educate our sellers right away. We provide them with information on what the policy is they violated, what the issue was with their listing, and how they should, in the future go forward and not repeat that violation. And like I said, the vast majority of those times, the sellers are happy to comply now that they know, what the issue is. For those sellers that that do have repeat violations of our policies, we do take more severe action, which can result in a temporary suspension from the site or an indefinite suspension if somebody, again, is a repeat violator, and/or we notice that they're trying to circumvent our policies by changing keywords or trying to get around our filters. For that kind of activity, we really don't have a whole lot of tolerance for that. And we, in addition to the filters and the Elvis system that I talked about, where we're monitoring and looking for items, we also get information on potential violations from other sources. We get direct reports from authorities. Those come directly to me or other people on our staff, and simply by email, and they email us, and we look into those and we take action on them. We also get a lot of reports from the eBay community. In each eBay listing, there is a report this item listing, where you get a drop-down menu and it shows, what policy you think it's violating, and you can report that, very quickly, and that goes into a queue. Again, that's reviewed by our customer service agents, who will determine whether the item violates their policy or not. And then lastly, the final step, if there's potential criminal activity or other stuff going on the site beyond just a simple ignorance of the regulations, where an education call or an education email is sufficient, we work directly with law enforcement agencies, and we have a process for, if they want to request eBay user data from us, we have a process that, through our privacy policy, we can work with them to provide that information if they provide us with the necessary information up front, if they want to conduct a further investigation. Or in some cases, it may not be a criminal investigation. Maybe they just want to send an email or a letter directly to the seller as well. And we found that to be pretty effective as well, because in some cases, again, if a seller gets a message from eBay, they may think one thing, but if they get an email message or a letter directly from a government agency that tells them they're violating a regulation or a law, that can have a pretty good deterrent effect as well, in addition to what eBay can do from an account basis. So sometimes the combination of those two can be pretty effective. And that's it in a nutshell. And thank you again for allowing me to participate, and happy to answer any other questions during the time period later in the panel.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. It's very interesting seeing all the different processes and procedures you have in place. It's good to know that you're thinking about it, and it's good to know that you're thinking about it with our NPPOs and others, and just by way of reflection, we have a couple of NPPO representatives, and I will ask Sarah to introduce them. Thank you.
Merci. Nous revenons donc à notre communauté phytosanitaire. Le premier intervenant sera Monsieur Kim Ritman, qui est le chef de la protection des végétaux pour le ministère australien de l'Agriculture et des Ressources en eau, et qui a la fonction de représenter le gouvernement dans les forums nationaux et internationaux. Merci Kim pour cette présentation.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and forgive me for not wearing a jacket. I'm too hot. The upside for you is I'm usually faster when I'm cool. It's indeed a pleasure to present to you today. It's not mine. I'm not Korea. I think we have the wrong set of slides. Oh, here we go. Good, thank you. It's indeed a pleasure to present to you about Australia's work that we're doing for the risks posed to our agriculture, unique environment and our way of life from the phenomena and growing phenomena of e-commerce. As you've heard, people buy stuff online that's digital. They then get it delivered through the mail pathway or through couriers, and that's a physical conveyance where the risk manifests. We've contacted potential and online suppliers of high-risk material to Australia, and these are things including plants, plant material and seeds, insects, snails, etc., veterinary pharmaceuticals such as flea collars and worm tablets, animal excrement. A key focus of ours is on seeds and sale of seeds in Australia, as you've heard from Mike. They pose a significant vectoring opportunity for many pathogens, as well as potentially turning out to be problems in themselves as invasive weeds. Online suppliers can be suppliers of large volumes, albeit in small packets, of unregulated trade. How do we communicate with them? Well, first of all, we identify them through three methods. One is detections on the international mail pathway. The second is suppliers are identified through doing an internet search on, for example, Internet Shipping Seeds Australia. And thirdly, public and other referrals, particularly relating to eBay. A number of specific high-risk seed searches have been undertaken, and over 200 entities were identified, ranging from individuals to commercial companies. The way we contact them, if they have an email address or an online contact form, we use that to send them a letter. Like Mike said, it's pretty potent when it comes from an NPPO. For entities where the email address or online contact form was not available, postal addresses were used. So we used the old-fashioned method. Identified suppliers were provided with an information sheet as well as the notification, which gave clear advice on our requirements for plants and seeds, for example, and details where further information could be found. And I'll just the previous. Oh, spin the wheel on the mouse. Okay. Okay, that's the slide I wanted anyway. And we point them to our website, which is the Biosecurity Import Conditions website, or so-called BICON, which has all the details for us. We work closely with eBay, as Mike Carson has just talked to you about, and I probably don't need to do a lot now, thanks to his presentation. But I must say that we work with other online suppliers as well as eBay. eBay have been very cooperative in posting details of our requirements on their website. Their policy requires sellers to comply with our published requirements. The key outcomes are that if the seller doesn't comply, eBay will take action to prevent the sale based on advice from us. eBay has also taken action against all the suppliers identified by us, and eBay has agreed to place a filter at our request blocking the sale of specific items. For example, tomato and capsicum seeds, as you've heard about, which has been really good. And it's so good that we presented Mike with a biosecurity award. Congratulations, Mike, if you can still hear me. The department is exploring opportunities to use social media to expand our reach and communicate with potential suppliers, also buyers. We use our Australian Biosecurity Facebook page to communicate with online shoppers about the importance of not purchasing high-risk material. But as indicated in my abstract for this presentation, we see the emergence of things like Facebook Marketplace, and there are a wide variety of other such marketplaces. Now, it's easy to deal, or relatively easy, if you've got an entity. Very easy to work with eBay. They're an entity. These Facebook marketplaces and other social media marketplaces are going to pose a real risk for us all and are harder to manage as individual NPPOs. So I pose to the CPM that we may wish to consider how we might collectively act to mitigate those risks that these marketplaces will place into the future for us, and it's only going to explode, only going to get bigger. And finally, here's an email contact that if you wanted to follow up any information about my presentation or about the way that we're dealing with e-commerce, use that email address, please, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim. That was great. It's amazing to see the results of cooperative work, and it's obviously paying off in Australia. Our next speaker and our final speaker will be introduced by Sarah.
Notre dernière intervenante est Madame Aung Sok Park, qui travaille depuis 2003 pour le service de coopération internationale pour la quarantaine animale et végétale de la République de Corée. Merci Aung Sok.
Can I change the slide? It's not which I sent. Maybe not. Today I'm going to talk about phytosanitary measures for international postal and courier service in Republic of Korea. Mostly it will be about a courier service. There will be two parts, and first I'd like to talk about the first one, the quarantine situation for couriers in Korea. So there were about 900,000 cases of import inspections. Among them, couriers accounts for about 60%. And as you can see, in 5 years, it was really tremendously increased, especially from 2013 to 2014. I assume that this is because of, oops. Sorry. I assume that this is because of growth in demand for health food in line with economic development, and also it could be growth in online for purchasing volume, such as overseas direct purchases. And I believe it will be increased in the future, especially in courier services. And it shows the status by transportation in 2016. So mostly the courier services comes to Incheon International Airport because since we had Incheon Airport Express Cargo Center in 2013, most of items courier services through courier services came to Incheon Airport. But recently, some cases came into Incheon Seaport, but still it's only 1% of the total amount. Now I move to the next part, which is the inspection system for couriers. So we have registration regarding courier services. So at first, only importers themselves can apply for plant quarantine services, but we realized that it's not really the matter of importers. Probably you already saw that UPL or like those kind of companies really in charge of taking those items. So we revised the regulations in December 2016. So now in both importers and the courier companies can apply for quarantine inspections. And also under Plant Protection Act, there is inspection method for imported plants. And it shows that how we apply for inspection through courier services and how do we inspect and how do we inform those results of inspection to the courier services. Now, I'd like to share registration and management for express company. So it is really related to customs service. So first, the courier company should register for customs. So they have to say, I'm gonna have these items through courier service. And then customs will declare this is okay for customs part. And there will be X-ray system. So after X-ray system, if it's those items are related to agricultural products or plant things, they will inform quarantine services. So, and the plant officers can go and look into the items. And at first, there were quarantine services in the spot, which will be delivered by courier services. But now, the courier services themselves have their own system with X-ray. So plant quarantine officers are just looking around, and then there is an audit system. So after came into Korea or domestic courier company, so there will be X-ray search. And then if anything is included with plant products, so we do plant quarantine. And if it's okay, it goes to customs clearance with the electronic system. And then the items can go to importers. So how do we do for plant quarantine? This is the diagram for inspection. So after courier arrival, they are selecting whether it's included plant materials or not. And if so, there will be inspection. So these are I believe you are familiar with those diagrams. If there is a pass, it's okay. If there is, if there is a pass, it's not okay. If there is no pass, it should be going into importers. So this is showing the system, Unipass system, which is a single window system in Korea. So on Saturday, Dr. Im already introduced this UniPass system in Korea. So it's a single window. So if importer want to import something, they have to connect to this system, and then there will be many directions from single window to like food or plant quarantine, animal quarantine, something like that. And I just divided it 3 items regarding risks of items. So first is low risk items. Mostly through Korea services, low risk items are delivered, such as dried flowers or fruits or vegetables or processed product. Second one is regulated articles. So if something is not allowed into Korea, so we inform this to importers, and it will be discarded. And third one is high-risk items. So as you know, seeds, bulbs, seedlings, and other plants for planting are really important, and they have high-risk items. They have high risk. So in that case, those items will go to laboratory, or otherwise, there will be like a post-entry system in Korea. I'd like to show the procedure of inspection. So when courier or those items come to the Incheon International Airport, it will go to the X-ray, and then if something is related to or some plant product is inside, those items are in the certain places, and then they are checking if it's just low risk items or it's really high risk items, which means documented review. And then plant quarantine officers will have inspection. It's completion. Thank you.
Thank you, Hong-suk. I have some good news and some bad news, and some good news and bad news. The translators have been kind enough, or interpreters, excuse me, have been kind enough to extend their time till 5:30, so we can have more translation time for the session. So that's good news, and I appreciate that, interpreters. It's also bad news for you because you have to work 20 extra minutes, so that's a good news and bad news. But in view of the time, and I know that people probably do have some questions, what I would really like is to have a few minutes of questions, but I'd like those questions to be pointed and specific rather than statements of fact, because the people who are here and the people on the screen are available only for limited time, and I think it's critical that if you have a question, you ask the question, address it to whom you intend, and take advantage of this time really to get answers that you're seeking. So I guess with that, the floor is open for questions, and I'm going to depend on my trusty CPM chairperson to push the right buttons. Liberia.
My question is to Sarah. Can we get the email of all of those that you are getting in contact with?
Yeah, I can answer straight away, yes, and these are already on the agenda, which is posted on the IPP, so you can already get them.
DRC, s'il vous plaît.
Merci pour la parole que vous m'accordez. Félicitations à tous. Ma question, c'est à Madame Fan, que je salue. En se basant sur le principe de non-discrimination de l'OMC, est-ce que la recommandation numéro 14 relative au commerce électronique édictée par la CIPV peut-elle être prise en compte afin d'éviter aux jeunes PV, lors des inspections ou de remise des certificats, de violer le principe de non-discrimination? Merci.
Merci pour votre question. J'étais en train de chercher cette fameuse recommandation 14 que je n'ai pas sous les yeux. Ah, c'est là, d'accord, celle du CIPV. En fait, l'accord de l'OMC sur les mesures sanitaires et phytosanitaires est très clair. Toutes les mesures qui sont prises doivent être basées sur la science, donc doivent pouvoir être justifiées de manière scientifique. Donc, la mesure de non-discrimination interdit le fait d'avoir une discrimination qui n'est pas justifiée par rapport à une raison scientifique. Donc, s'il y a une raison scientifique pour une différenciation du traitement qui est accordé au produit ou à l'attitude qui est prise par rapport à un risque, cela n'est pas considéré comme une discrimination dans le sens de l'accord SPS. Donc, toute mesure prise doit être justifiée scientifiquement. Si c'est le cas, ce n'est pas une mesure, une décision qui est considérée comme étant discriminative.
Gabon.
Merci beaucoup. Ma question s'adresse à Madame Fall et c'est à la suite de celle posée par Monsieur Mamba. Ça va à peu près dans le même sens. Je voulais savoir comment le comité SPS fait pour prendre en compte cette recommandation 14 de la CMP 9. Merci.
Alors, merci. Je continue de pratiquer mon français, que je devrais plus pratiquer, étant francophone. Alors, c'est ce que j'ai mentionné au début de ma présentation. Le comité SPS ne peut prendre des actions que s'il est au courant de cette recommandation ou si les membres décident d'en discuter lors du comité SPS. Donc, il faut effectivement que le CIPV, mais également les parties contractantes qui sont dans cette salle, qui sont intéressés par une discussion au niveau du comité SPS, que vous souleviez cette question lors du comité SPS et de voir effectivement ce qu'en pensent les membres du comité et comment mettre en œuvre ces recommandations. Donc, je vous encourage vivement, pour ceux qui sont intéressés, donc tous les NPPO qui sont dans la salle, à soulever ce genre de questions lors des réunions du comité SPS à Genève. Merci.
I see the CPM chairperson's screen is blank. Oh. Denmark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question goes particularly to the GEA and to eBay. I'm very interested to. I noted that for eBay, you explained that there are five. You showed 5 boxes of sources of information to your filtering system. I didn't hear that same explanation from GEA, but I suppose, well, in both cases, my question is really, do your huge big companies working globally, do you envisage to have sort of liaison with each and every, say, 180 odd countries of the world to ensure that you have the information from all the various countries, agencies, regulatory agencies? And if so, if you wish to have such liaison, on whose initiative would that be? On your initiative or on our side? Who is the who would have that burden? Thank you very much.
Maybe if I may, just so you don't start talking at the same time, Carlos, could you provide the first answer, and then Mike?
The answer is in a way yes. Our station managers deal with border agencies day in, day out, and it is our policy to establish a relationship of a partnership with the various border agencies, customs taking the lead usually in our line of business. What we see as very important here is the establishment of single windows for the ability to submit information once to one point and get all the information back from the agencies through one single channel. That exists in some countries, not in all. In some cases, we need to deal with up to 53 border agencies at any given point. So it makes life interesting. We believe that the more we can rely on electronic tools, on automation, the better. And that takes a huge effort of coordination on our side, but also on the government side to make sure that all agencies that deal with border issues are coordinated amongst themselves and provide relevant information to industry. On the sources of information, we rely, of course, on our internal controls very much. But as I said at the beginning, unlike eBay, we don't see the underlying transaction. So at the end of the day, we have to base our own targeting on the information provided to us by the shipper, which in some cases might not be accurate. And it might not be accurate, as Mike mentioned, either because they don't know better, which can happen, and hence our efforts to educate them, or because they are willfully lying. That triggers a completely different kind of response. But in order to legally close accounts, sometimes we will need input from the authorities. So again, in short, yes, we seek that relationship. It can be a complicated relationship because, again, there's a plethora of border agencies that we need to deal with. We trust that automation and IT will help us a lot there, but count on us to work with you to overcome all these difficulties.
Yeah, no. From my perspective, I would agree. We see it as a two-way street, and so one of the reasons why we like participating in these large international conferences is to, one, just make you aware of the steps that eBay takes and get our name, my contact name out there. If you come across something, or if there's people in the audience, or if you have a large agency and someone else in your agency says, "Hey, I've got an issue with eBay. Do you have any idea who to contact over there?" We like to make it as easy as possible, so it's not a letter to a CEO that takes a month to sort of trickle to my desk or to one of my colleagues' desk. And so in that case, if you guys have an issue, you know who to come to at eBay, and likewise, if we come across something, hopefully, getting some of these contacts, we have a broader range of people to go to as well if we see something on our end. So in some cases, it may be that we see something on our end and we are looking for expert advice, but there are also things that we just don't know about at all. And so we would look for those government agencies to come to us and raise that issue with us. And we would like to try and make it as easy as possible.
Okay, thanks. Seeing as that there are no more questions at this point, we have a couple of things that are slated for 30 minutes, but we have 10 with the translator, so Congo again, Democratic Republic of.
Merci encore, Madame la Présidente, pour la parole. Je reviens aussi à Madame Medina pour le douane. La question sera transversale également à la représentante de la Convention sur la diversité biologique. Il y a un constat. Les services de douane, pour l'ensemble, n'ont pas de considération pour les zones PV. Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez aujourd'hui déclarer? Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez entreprendre? Puisqu'il y a collaboration au niveau des conventions, mais au niveau des États, il y a flottement. Quel message vous pouvez donner aujourd'hui pour réchauffer cette collaboration qui est au niveau des conventions pour qu'elle soit à un niveau inférieur? La même question également pour le point de contact des CDV dans nos pays. Quel message vous pouvez lancer aujourd'hui pour que cette collaboration soit réchauffée afin de rassurer le commerce international? Merci.
Junko, can you answer his question? Okay. Yeah, WCO maybe.
Thank you for that question, Gongo. And it's actually, DRC, it's actually quite pointed. At the heart of what we do at the WCO, we believe in a coordinated border management approach. We believe in an inclusive approach to effectively manage trade flows at the borders. From a member perspective, we offer customs administrations across the globe a lot of tools and instruments that should be implemented at the national level, and which include guidance on how to engage with other agencies at the border. So from the WCO, we can work closely together with the IPPC, have a look at the CBM or coordinated border management related tools that we have, and see how we can make sure that the topics that we're discussing here today are included or taken into consideration. As was mentioned already, both secretariats are attending each other's relevant meetings in an effort to achieve exactly that, to make sure that we manage our borders in a coordinated way.
Thank you. At this point, given the limited time, unless people want to stay and we can have free translation from members of the audience, which I doubt you want to do, you should have available a number of proposals in your hand. We're going to project those for just a few moments. And what I was going to do is invite Madam Chairperson to, after a brief review, I'm sure you've all looked at it all day long, but maybe to see if the CPM would be willing to invite, to request the Bureau to develop a way forward in their June 2017 meeting to include resource considerations. We'll do the best we can in the limited time available, but if we could project this list of proposals, that would be greatly appreciated.
That's number 9, panel discussion.
Bear in mind the Bureau only has 4 days to meet and we've got other business. One of the things that's very useful for us is to consider and be really clear on the outcome that you want to achieve, and that will help us with the process and the elements to get there. Yeah. We could look at something like a complementary action plan like we did with the sea containers. We have a recommendation which may lend itself to some actions. We've heard from a number of the players. Several of them were very clear that they've got limitations in their ability to do stuff in the space. So being really clear about who has responsibilities where and how it links together and what the opportunities are for collaboration might be something that you want to bear in mind when you come up with a wish list. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering if anybody would like to add additional comment. I think.
Shall we go through that thing?
Okay. Do you want to?
If they find it.
Okay. If we find it, we'll go through it. If we don't, we'll use the summary that was just presented as sufficient information for further development.
Yes, what we've done is to aggregate in a sole document, in a sole presentation, all the suggestions which were made within these 7 presentations. Next one, please, can you, or should I go there? Okay. So first of all, the international organization suggested that we should enhance collaboration among our institutions. And there were several points made that IPPC should continue monitoring the issue of phytosanitary risks related to e-commerce and the implementation of its recommendations. We should follow member exchanges on e-commerce, including any possible identification of gaps in trade rules regarding e-commerce of plants and plant products. We should pursue secretariat-to-secretariat information exchange and contribute to discussions on e-commerce held within the structures of the WTO, WCO, CBD, and others. For instance, there was an invitation from the WCO to participate in this working group on e-commerce. IPPC was also encouraged to himself encourage the other standard-setting organizations such as Codex and OIE
to identify the relevant risks arising from e-commerce and to develop any necessary recommendations. WCO also suggested that we should develop a joint risk assessment for more effective targeting. CBD suggested that we should develop further guidance and involve e-traders and others. And there was also the suggestion that the SPS committee members should be informed of the IPPC work and recommendation on the issue of e-commerce, and we tackled this in the question. I'm moving on to what concerns what we've seen regarding further collaboration at the national level. We have touched upon the need for closer collaboration between NPPOs and customs at the national level. There should also be an increased engagement in relevant fora to raise awareness to relevant border and courier agencies and other national stakeholders. And Australia and Korea showed us how they did. And there's also a proposal to engage and participate in the Trade Facilitation Committee under the Trade Facilitation Agreement of the WTO to ensure awareness on e-commerce on a broad scale. And that closes the loops of what we said on the international level, need for cooperation. We then got some suggestions from the private sector, and specifically from eBay. eBay mentioned that you, as NPPO, should report on what you see which goes wrong. So the suggestion is to highlight regionally or nationally the top concerns of commodity being sold online to the suppliers. So there should be this mechanism. We were thinking that the IPPC Secretariat could create with the e-commerce industry a template and the procedures for member countries to report on their major concerns. The RPPOs and MPPOs would then be trained on how to use this template and would collect feedback on how this reporting is being undertaken. The express delivery companies also made suggestions on what they could do with us. They could provide advanced electronic shipment information to enable customers or other agencies to perform the risk assessment, because this might be information which is missing to assess your risk. They propose to track and trace packages identified by authorities as suspicious and to remove them from the traffic flows for further examination. This is a big step. They propose to provide the customs with adequate and controlled facilities to conduct examinations efficiently if needed. They suggested to provide authorities with available relevant information on shippers and consignees of shipments identified as containing goods with potential phytosanitary risks. This is bound to the legal limits which exist in this field. And they also suggested to close the accounts of customers identified by authorities as repeat offenders. And once again, there are rules in this field, and this proposal is subject to the legal limits. And then another, let's say, overall proposal would be to raise awareness of all the relevant stakeholders that could involve to create an IPPC webpage on e-commerce and a contact point for additional information exchange, and to develop, in cooperation with the industry and the relevant international organizations, to develop any training or capacity development as well as information material to explain the phytosanitary risks of e-commerce. And we had some examples of announcements which are made, and there could be little movies, little videos being displayed as well, which could be easily developed. This is the state of the proposal. And I now hand it over to Craig.
Merci, Sarah. So, with the chair's indulgence, even though I guess I'm the, well, never mind. I would just see if the CPM is interested in requesting that the Bureau develop a way forward, or were they content with Madam Chair's previous summary and commentary regarding this proposal? I invite brief comment. I know that interpreters are probably dying to get out of their booths, so brief, pithy, to-the-point comments, if any. Democratic Republic of Congo.
Ajouter que, merci d'abord pour la parole, que pour le prochain thème à développer par le comité de normes, que soit inscrit à l'instar de normes sur le conteneur, inscrire ce thème de commerce électronique. Deuxième, dans les recommandations, que le renforcement des capacités en matière de commerce électronique des zones PV, à l'instar d'Australie et des États-Unis, soit envisagé. Et je recommande que toutes ces résolutions, qu'on donne injonction certainement au nouvel organe d'implantation, de mise en œuvre, de se pencher dessus. Et également au SPJ, comme groupe de planification, d'étudier cela en profondeur pour la prochaine CMP. Merci.
Thank you. I think those are good points, and I know that Sarah's taken note of them, and I'm sure that if the Bureau is requested to do this, that those will definitely be taken into consideration. Any other comments? And then we can close for the day.
All right. So at the end of this exercise, the CPM is invited to request the Bureau to develop a way forward in June 2017 meeting that includes resource considerations. Does the CPM wish for the Bureau to have a look at this issue and determine a way forward, presumably then engaging with Standards Committee, Implementation Committee to SPG? Do we care? I think everyone's very tired. Yes, no? Yes? Okay, yes, all right, we will. But we will be engaging with you and we'll be engaging with our speakers, I can assure you. I don't have to bang it. No, okay. Thank you very much.
One announcement. One quick announcement. Any Standard Committee members present, please meet in the back of the room by the interpretation booths for 10 minutes with Brent. Brent was over there waving his hand. Aside from that, have a good evening and make the most of, for some of you, which is the last evening in Korea also. One other well-written and clear-to-read announcement. I thank you, Mr. Ward from EPPO. All EPPO countries are invited to the EPPO panel meeting tomorrow morning from 8:30 to 12 noon in room 103. So now go make the most of, for some of you, the last evening in Incheon, at least for this go-round.
Argentina.
Gracias. Para saber a qué hora va a estar el reporte para poder leerlo. Gracias.
You're always asking hard questions, Diego. But while the session starts at 2, we're hoping to have the first part at the normal time by noon tomorrow, if not earlier. But that's our plan. We're hoping for that, so hopefully by noon tomorrow, so you have a couple hours. And there should be a hard copy outside, not inside, but there should be hard copies available. So, actually, before everyone leaves, can we just give a round of applause to the speakers and the presenters?
You may leave. Thank you all very much for your contribution.